Hi everyone, these are the new and improved spinal cord blood circulation and cerebrospinal fluid notes. As we see here, we have the spinal cord area, and the spinal cord is divided into sections and nerve groups. So the first 8 nerve pairs are going to be the cervical spinal cord section area where those nerves are in blue. The thoracic nerve pairs, there are 12 of them in the upper back. The lower back is the lumbar region, which have 5 nerve pairs. And the sacral region is here with 5 nerve pairs. And then we have the last section you don't need to know, but which is called the cauda equina. So the spinal cord, as you can see, a cross section here, it's got the same meninges as we learned about in the brain and spinal cord notes that I recently talked about. We have the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. And you can see this cross-section of the spinal cord in this picture. So let's go ahead and take a little bit closer look at what the spinal cord looks like. So this picture shows us a cross-section of the spinal cord. So it's important to figure out where we're at when we're looking at the spinal cord cross-section. So you see the dorsal horn here and the ventral horn here. So that helps us give us a directionality to our spinal cord. If the dorsal horn is there, dorsal means the back. So this is the back of the spinal cord. The front of the spinal cord, and we're talking about back and front in terms of the person. So if you're looking at a person's cross-section of a spinal cord, this is their front, and here is the back of that person. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other features that we can see. We can see the sensory neuron soma, or the body. Remember, sensory neurons are typically unipolar, with an exception of a few of our senses that are bipolar. So we have a unipolar neuron. It's a sensory neuron taking in information, and it's going to have some tissue, and it's going to come up with this word called the dorsal root ganglion. Okay, so dorsal root ganglion I'm going to talk about in a couple of seconds here. That is like something that we need to know in terms of a cross-section of a spinal cord. But dorsal root is going to be here, and then we have the dorsal, meaning the back of something, so that kind of helps us with our directionality. And its synapse is here with the gray matter in this middle of the spinal cord. The white matter is also here, and white matter we talked about, the difference between white matter and gray matter. So white matter there is going to be the columns, and the gray matter is going to be that butterfly-looking shape in the middle. So then that information is processed in the central nervous system, and then the information is relayed to the motor neuron. So the motor neuron is going to be here. Okay, so in red, the motor neurons are going to be there. Typically, those are multipolar, right? So we call that the ventral root. Okay, so that is going to be the front of the body, and that gets relayed to the motor function. Okay, so here is just a couple things. So it always goes from the sensory neuron. Okay, so either way, if we're on this side or on this side, the sensory neuron brings the information to the central nervous system, and then that information is processed, relayed up to the brain and back, and then the motor neuron is going to send that information to the skeletal muscles to do something about it. All right, so let's go through some of these terms in the spinal cord cross-section, and we can always come back to that picture. So the first thing is the gray horns. So if we go ahead and take a look here, the gray horns are going to be the posterior or dorsal horn area. So the dorsal horn area is here, okay? And it's going to be on this side too, so both sides, okay? So that is going to be the posterior or dorsal horn, and that is going to be in charge of your sensory processing. So the axons of the sensory neurons will synapse with the neurons in the posterior horn. So you can see here, here's the posterior horn, and here's another side, symmetrical. Okay, so sensory. So that's why, we typically think they're unipolar, with an exception of a few of our senses that are bipolar neurons. Okay, so we talk about these gray horns being a cluster of cell bodies Okay. And what they're going to do is they are going to have that sensory information. So bodies, let's go ahead and make that plural, my bad. That sensory neuron information, bringing information to the spinal cord. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, please go ahead and make sure you ask me. But here is those clusters of cell bodies bringing information to the spinal cord. And then the opposite, or the anterior or ventral horn, is going to be the side or the front side of the body. And that is going to be sending these signals, the motor signals, to the skeletal muscle to do something about it. Okay, so up here in our picture, the ventral horns are going to be here, and those are synapsing with the motor neurons. Okay, so they contains axons of motor neurons carrying the information, impulses. Let's see if I've got my information here correctly. Sending motor signals to the skeletal muscle. Okay. We are carrying motor impulses away from the spinal cord and to the skeletal muscle. So an example is a multipolar neuron that causes your big toe to move. That's just an example. It's actually one of the longest in the body because your big toe is kind of far away from your spinal cord. So here is a very simplistic cross-section of a spinal cord region. Obviously, there's another side to this, right? So this is just a half version, but it's just showing you, okay, so we have our spinal nerve coming in. The dorsal root ganglion is going to be that collection of the cell bodies, bringing that sensory information in. The sensory root is going to be the connecting factor to the dorsal horn. Dorsal horn is just going to be where it's synapsing. That information is going to be carried up to the spinal, through the spinal cord, through the central nervous system, to the brain, and then back through. That the ventral horn is going to synapse with the motor neuron. Okay, and then it says ventral root, but these words are pretty all synonymous. Okay, so that is going to be the gray horns. Okay, that's going to be, it kind of looks like horns, but it's like this here. Next is going to be the white columns. The white columns is white matter separated into columns. So the white matter is going to be like this outside part. Okay, so we have ascending tracts and descending tracts. So ascending means they're going up the spinal column to the brain. Okay, so it says there are columns that carry sensory information to the brain. Okay, because they're ascending, we're going up to the brain. The name of the ascending tracts starts with spinal. Okay, and it's going to end with the part of the brain they go to. So the spinothalamic tract is going to be the tract that starts in the spine, and it's going to go up to the thalamus. So the word is like where it starts. The prefix is where the signal is kind of coming from, and then the end of the tract is going to be the base of the word. Spinothalamic tract. So it's going up the spine to the thalamus. Descending tracts take information away from the brain and carry on the motor function. So here's an example. It's opposite. So do you see how it says spinothalamic tract for ascending? This one is ending with spinal and it's starting with another word. So this means your corticospinal tract is an example. Okay, so your cortices, bringing it down through the spine. Okay. So here's the corticospinal tract in a picture. So you see the motor cortex of the cerebrum and the cerebrum itself, and it's bringing the information back to the muscle. Because you remember in your motor cortex of your cerebrum and the frontal lobe, that is where all of your skeletal muscle like movement originates, right? So Basically, you got to bring it all the way back down through all these parts, and eventually we end with the motor impulse. So cortico-spinal, start here and here in the tract. Okay. All right. So we're moving on to the central nervous system and circulation. So obviously, central nervous system has strict control over what leaves the bloodstream and enters its tissues. We have specialized structures for circulation maintenance because you don't want a clot or you don't want anything like damaged. So we have these specialized structures to do that, and we also filter the blood to create spinal fluid. All right, so the path of the blood to the brain, starting with the aorta. So if you take a look at my picture here, the aorta is coming or stemming from the heart. It's the largest blood vessel in the body, and it's coming from the heart. So I don't know if I have a picture of the aorta here. It's just like coming from down here, basically. Okay, so from the aorta, we're going to travel to the common carotid artery. Okay. I don't know if I have a picture of that. I mean, I have the internal. So the common carotid artery is going to be one of those main arteries that is allowing blood to go to the brain. It enters the brain through an opening in the temporal bone of the skull called the carotid canal. I think my blank got cut off by the picture. I apologize. Okay, so here is the image here of the picture I wanted to show you in terms of the whole. Okay, that's called the carotid canal, and you might see it when you look at the skull eventually when we talk about bones. So from the aorta, it can also travel through the subclavian arteries and the vertebral arteries. Okay, so I'm looking for subclavian. I think it's going to be, I don't even have any pictures. I apologize. If you just Google these images, you can also insert them here. Like, what are these looking like? You can put a picture here for me. Either way, the subclavian arteries feed into the vertebral arteries, and then so that's kind of the flow of the blood, and they enter the brain through a large opening in the skull called the foramen magnum. A lot of kids say the word. They say foramen. It's not foramen, it's foramen. Foramen means hole. So the foramen magnum is going to be this big guy here that usually we try to put his head back together on Jose, our class skeleton. So that's the one. And they merge into the basilar artery, which gives rise to branches to the brainstem and the cerebellum. All right. So the left and right internal carotids and branches of the basilar arteries become the circle of Willis. Now, the circle of Willis is a really cool structure in the brain. It's blood vessels. Okay. And it looks like this. We see our basilar arteries here, vertebral arteries. And then we have the internal carotid artery, and basically it makes this big circle. Okay, the circle is great because it helps maintain your blood flow, even if you have a narrowing or a blockage. It's like your body's like way to make sure that it doesn't limit the flow. And you always have a blood circulation up there. So at the circle of Willis, the internal carotid arteries branch into the smaller arteries that supply oxygenated blood to over 80% of the cerebrum. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like inside. It's kind of cool. Okay, so when you stand up really fast, okay, it's called an orthostatic reflex. So I have a picture over here of what happens. So when you stand up real fast, the blood is not quite in your brain fully, because when you stand up, all of the forces of gravity kind of pushing down on the blood. And so what happens is it takes you a second for you to get to your senses and for your blood vessels to expand. And so it's a reaction to standing up. The bases of the reflex are based on the common carotid. So the bases of those contain stretch receptors. So you have little like molecules in your blood vessels that respond to lack of blood flow. So that standing up really fast causes your blood pressure to drop. Okay. And in response, the stretch receptors will send a signal to the brain, and your autonomic nervous system will increase your heart rate and constrict the carotid arteries. That should allow the blood pressure to go back up in response. So that's why you kind of see some stars, and you got to give yourself a second, because that's called the orthostatic reflex. I'm going to talk more about reflexes next time we're together. But for now, that's the one reflex I have for you. Now, when everything's done and good and the blood flow has happened in the brain, we got to bring it back to the heart. So I have a picture. There's obviously way more blood vessels in terms of the veins in the brain, but these are the main ones, the internal and the external jugular. You probably heard of, the jugular before. Oh, they got me in the jugular, I'm dying. Okay. But those are going to be your main veins that bring your deoxygenated blood back to the heart. Okay, those are huge blood vessels, and you can probably feel, your heartbeat if you put your fingers on that area. And last but not least, my friends, we got a couple more concepts here. The ventricular system is going to be of the ventricles. We already learned about the ventricles in our class, so this should be easy. They are open spaces where cerebrospinal fluid will circulate. So at this point, I've only taught you that the cerebrospinal fluid circulates in the subarachnoid space. So now I'm also, going a step further and saying, we have all these spaces for the cerebrospinal fluid to flow, and it's produced by the ependymal cells we already learned about. And those line the ventricles, and those ventricles that are lined with that special membrane is called choroid plexus. So here's the topic about choroid plexus. So for now, just highlight. Okay, specialized membrane made of ependymal cells lining the ventricles. So the ependymal cells filter the blood as it circulates through the cerebrospinal fluid and it also makes more of cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is a clear solution that's made of mostly water, small molecules, and electrolytes. It helps pick up waste for the central nervous system. It helps provide a liquid cushion for the central nervous system. It does a lot of things, nourishment, etc. And it flows from the lateral ventricles to the third and the fourth ventricle, and then to the central canal of the spinal cord and through the subarachnoid space. Eventually, it's reabsorbed into the blood from that subarachnoid space. Okay, so what is this choroid plexus? So if we went ahead and zoomed in on this special tissue at the surface level, this is what it would look like. It functions as a barrier at the interface of the blood, or between the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. So it's at the blood-brain barrier. The choroid plexus is located within those cerebral ventricles and form the barrier called the blood cerebrospinal fluid barrier, or blood-brain barrier, I think people have called it. So that's what this BCSFB stands for. BCSFB. Okay, so if we zoom in here, let's take a look. All right, so we have the inside of the thalamus here in this space. Okay, and then this is the choroid plexus. And then we have the cerebrospinal fluid in the third ventricle. Okay, so what's happening is we have a gas exchange happening. So ions, vitamins, well, not just gas, but some other molecules too, are leaving through these cells, the ependymal cells, the ions, vitamins, organic nutrients, oxygen here leaving the blood capillaries. And then we have waste ions, amino acids, etc., going into the blood capillaries. And you see this blood-brain barrier here with the neuron and the astrocyte, which are glial cells. There's a lot going on in this picture, but basically, kids, the choroid plexus is key for that exchange and the interface between your blood vessels and the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, and that's all, my friends. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Don't forget to draw a smiley face at the end and submit your notes. And you know, as further proof that you watched, please provide at the bottom here your favorite part of anatomy so far. So write it at the very end in this space and then go ahead and submit so I can read it. Thanks for watching. Bye.